Hi everyone, welcome to Easter Centerpiece Virtual Floral Workshop. That's a mouthful. Today is our annual Easter Centerpiece Workshop. We are teaching this both virtually and in studio in person, as we are doing for many of our workshops in the 2024 calendar year. We're very excited to be designing a beautiful long and low centerpiece that's perfect for the middle of a dining table. And today we're going to be using a 12-inch birch container. It's a rectangular shape, so it's really ideal for a long, slender table. Would also be beautiful on a sideboard or a buffet piece. Also could be great on a kitchen island, so very versatile. And before we get started, we're going to have a little bit of prep work to do to get our vase ready for flowers. Everyone who is designing and purchase the virtual workshop, you should have gotten the actual container and then some floral foam. So to prep your floral foam, a couple of minutes before you get started with workshop, you'll want to drop your pieces of foam into a filled sink or a bucket of water and just walk away and let them kind of lower down in the water line for a good couple of minutes. When you're handling foam, the one thing you don't want to do is push down with your hand, so it needs to naturally sink in the water. If you push with your hand, you will get little air pockets in the foam. So just throw it in the water, walk away, go do something else, and then come back when it's good and ready. With your foam, you're going to want to just drop the pieces straight into the vase. If you have a little bit of excess foam, you can just trim it off with a knife. It's really easy to cut into floral foam. And once you've got your pieces of foam set in your vase, you're going to want to also take a little bit of water and fill all the way up to the tippy top of the vase, so it's a well-hydrated container to put your flowers in. I recommend with foam, anytime you're arranging with foam, to add water at least once a day because your flowers are incredibly thirsty and they need a good water reserve to live a long while. And that's really all you need to prep. The other thing that you will need to grab is some type of cutting tool. So I will interchange. You'll see that I use both clippers. These are ARS clippers. It's a Japanese brand that is really nice and lasting. And then I also will use a floral knife. So anything that you've got is fine at home. If you have scissors, you can use scissors for tonight, but I would recommend investing in a good pair of clippers because they really are the best for cutting your stems. And that's really all you need to get going. So once you've got your vase prepped and your flowers next to you, and I'll show you what the bucket looks like. It's really beautiful and overfilled. We're going to start with laying the base of our arrangement. And so our base is going to be a hydrangea and ornamental cabbage base. So I'm going to start with fishing out my hydrangea stems. And we're using a baby green hydrangea in our design. And these are beautiful, very springy, and they're going to create a nice backdrop for our flowers. Hydrangea is a really great tool for tracing out the shape of your design. So I always like to start with kind of mapping out the lines of my arrangement. And I'm gonna take my hydrangea stems and I'm just gonna peel off any of the low-lying leaves. So if you look here at my hydrangea stem, I've got some leaves that are pretty low down on the stem. I'm gonna rip those off, and you can do that with your hand. And I'm just gonna leave the topmost leaves that kind of cup the flower because I think they're pretty. And then I'm gonna cut my stem length. And since this is the first cut, we're going to explain in minutia detail how you make your cuts. So anytime you cut a stem, you want to cut it long enough so that the stem goes all the way down to the bottom of the vase because that's where the extra reserves of water will be. And you also want to make sure that you're cutting on a nice deep angle. So if you're using a knife, it's easy to pull a nice angled cut. And if you're using clippers or scissors, you just want to cut diagonally across the stem. So the reason you cut on an angle is because you're opening more surface area for the stem to drink. So just a nice deep angle is good. And then I'm gonna go ahead and start positioning my baby green hydrangea. And I'm gonna put kind of on an angle or a slant. There's my first one. I'm gonna do all four corners and then I'm gonna do the middle of the long and low as well. And with each stem that I use, I'm just peeling off the low-lying leaves and just leaving on the ones that cup the bloom. And I'm also going to analyze my stem. If you look at this hydrangea stem, he's got kind of a funny lean. Seldom do flowers grow perfectly straight, so you oftentimes have to troubleshoot as you pull each stem out of the bucket. So you want to make sure that the pretty part of the flower, or the face of the flower, is what is pointing out. So see, it's pretty if I position it like that in the vase, not so pretty if I position it like that. So figure out where the prettiest part of the flower is and make sure that that is what is pointing out and visible. And then I'm giving an angled cut, and I'm just going to guide this stem in. Oops, I'm gonna cut it a little shorter. I'm gonna guide this stem in so that it is sitting all the way down towards the bottom of the vase where there are water reserves. So I've got the corner, middle of my vase, and then I'm gonna put another stem down on the corner, just like so. So that's what it looks like. And then I'm gonna do a spin move. I'm gonna spin my long and low around. I'm gonna do the same thing on this side. Okay. If at any time you feel like you are falling behind, the beauty of a virtual workshop is you can pause me and restart me a million times. So don't be afraid to pause and restart and rewatch as you need. Okay. I am making a mess. I'm teaching tonight from my kitchen because I ran out of time today in the studio to record. So my kids are with grandparents, I have a quiet house, and I'm teaching from my kitchen. It feels like COVID times when I used to teach virtual workshops in my kitchen. So it's funny to be back to doing this. And I forgot what a huge disaster this creates in my kitchen, which I'm sure some of you are sitting in your kitchen trying to do this. So I'm gonna clean as I go. I've got 2 big handfuls of hydrangea leaves that I ripped off the stems. I'm just gonna toss these in my trash can. Okay, back in business. So now that we've got our hydrangea placed, we are going to start working in some of our greenery to fill in the gaps in between the hydrangea. And we're also gonna build out a little bit of height in our long and low. I kept my hydrangea really nice and low along the vase line, which is beautiful because they're spilling over the vase a little bit. You can see the side profile. They're kind of falling down, which I like. But now I need to fill in some of the gaps, and I also want to cover some of the visible foam. So I'm going to grab for my Oregonia. This is a favorite greenery of ours this time of year. It's variegated, so it's green and white, which feels very springy. Anytime you get variegated greens in the spring, it just feels fresh and seasonally appropriate. And Oregonia is an awesome greenery because it is totally wilt-free. It does not wilt easily. And it's also really happy to be cut into smaller pieces. So if you look up here, I'm going to just cut my Oregonia into smaller bits. So wherever I've got a good break in the stem is where I'm cutting. And then I'm going to peel off any leaves that are on the bottom half of the stem because I don't want my leaves going down into my foam. And I'm just gonna start placing my Oregonia all over in my long and low. And I'm gonna keep the Oregonia a little bit more trim on this long side of the vase, and I'm going to keep it a little bit longer to extend the ends of my long and low. So see how I'm really flaring out the long sides of my long and low. I'm gonna create some drama, and I'm gonna work in all of this greenery. So it's a good healthy bunch that you've got to work with. I like to do all of my snipping at once. So I'm gonna cut all of my pieces at once, and then I'll pop them in at once. Okay, I'm gonna put a few pieces up in the center of my long and low, and I'm not gonna let them get too tall. A good rule of thumb is however tall your vase is how tall you should go with your product. So I've got a 4-inch long and low. I'm gonna keep my total height to about 4 inches. And that's important just to keep scale in your design. You really don't want to wind up with a 10-inch tall arrangement and just a tiny 4-inch base height. As I'm doing this, I'm going to adjust my camera for a second so that you guys can see a little bit of a wider angle. Okay, that is much better. All right, so just working this in. I'm still going to have some visible foam. That's fine, because remember, we still have a huge bucket of flowers to play with, but just covering up a good portion of the foam and also continuing to trace out the shape that our design is going to take. And as you position your flowers from here on out and your greens, you want to make sure that you're not just sticking your stems in straight up and down. So you want to put some blooms in that are straight up and down. You also want to angle some so that they're pretty from the side of the design. So make sure you're inspecting as you go and looking at your long and low from all angles. Just because you've got good coverage up top does not mean that you've got good coverage on the sides. So just look from different perspectives as you add your ingredients. Now that our Oregonia is in, I'm going to continue to clean up the mess I've made. Now that our Oregonia is in, we're going to reach for our next largest ingredient, and that is going to be, actually I lied. We're going to quickly pop in our umbrella fern before we grab for our kale. Umbrella fern is always easier to get into a vase when it's still pretty empty, so we're going to pop this in really quickly. Umbrella fern is a really, really light, dainty fern. It's very pretty, feels very spring-like, and it's named because it looks kind of like an umbrella. So we're going to take our umbrella fern and we're going to cut the stems pretty short. And the reason we cut the stems a little bit shorter on the umbrella fern than everything else is because we want our umbrella fern to kind of bunch together and insert all the way in. So we don't need a terribly long stem to do that. So I'm going to take one umbrella fern and nest it in so that it's kicking out to one side. And then I'm going to take the other umbrella fern and nest it in so that it's kicking out to the other side. So it's really beautiful and wispy in my long and low. Okay, so now that I've got that placed, I'm going to reach for my ornamental cabbage next. And this guy has a sad leaf. I'm just going to pull that off. Ornamental cabbage or ornamental kale is one of my absolute favorite ingredients for fall. But I also think it's a great ingredient for spring because it feels like a spring cabbage feel. You see a lot of cabbage on springtime china patterns, and it's very Eastery. So we're going to take this kale and we're going to pare it down a tiny bit so it's more manageable to work with. Mine is huge. This is the size of my face for reference, so it's really big. So I'm going to take away some of the low leaves. Just going to peel them off. And we're going to lose about half the size of this cabbage. Once I've peeled away the low leaves, I'm going to work my hands into the center and just flare it out so it looks really beautiful. And we're going to cut this stem down to about a 4-inch stem length, that magic length. And we're going to cut it on a nice deep angle like you see here. And we're just going to start popping our kale in to our arrangement. We have 3, so let's plan to do 2 on one side and 1 on the other. And this is a huge stem, so it's good that we're getting it in nice and early because we don't want to be trying to force this huge stem in later on. So look how beautiful that looks right there. Really, really pretty. So I'm again peeling off my low-lying leaves, and then I'm going to flare out my cabbage so that it looks kind of like a rose. And I'm going to cut at an angle. And I'm going to pop it in on the other side. And then for my third, I'm going to pop it in somewhere in the middle. And you'll see as I insert my stem, I'm not going straight up and down, I'm going kind of at an angle. So see how beautiful that is to the side? You want to make sure to face some of our flowers really out to the side. So I'll give you a spin so you can see where my kale is. I've got one off to the side, one in the middle, and one off to the other side. Okay. So that's it. So now that I've got my kale placed, I'm going to start diving into my roses, and we've got a few different varieties of standard and garden rose. Our color palette is really beautiful. It is a peachy, lavender, pink color palette, and we've got lots of goodies to play with. The first rose that I'm going to grab for is called Kahala, and I'll show you up close. Kahala is a beautiful cantaloupe colored rose, and it's kind of a cheat rose because it really has the appearance of a garden rose. So it's got a huge high petal count in the center, looks really ruffly, but it carries a regular standard rose price tag. So this is a great cheat. It looks way more expensive than it is, and we love that. So we're gonna start with these guys. We're going to have to condition these roses. All the stems in your bucket, you're probably realizing, are in wholesale condition, so we've got work to do. We're gonna start by peeling off all of the leaves. So every single leaf on the rose stem needs to come off. We do not, however, want to mess with the sepals, which are the green pieces on the underside of the rose. So we never want to touch these. You will harm the integrity of the rose if you do, and you may start to lose petals prematurely if you mess around with those. So we leave them alone, but we do need to also take off guard petals, which are the outermost petals on the rose. So we're just going to start peeling off anything that is damaged or has a blemish on the outside of the rose, and just leave on the good-looking, healthy petals. And that's really it for conditioning your roses. Once you've done that, we're ready to start cutting to our length. So a piece of advice, if you want to keep your rose lower down, like this height, tucked right up against the base line, I would recommend a stem length of around 4 inches. So 4 inches of stem. And then if you want your rose to sit a little bit higher up in the arrangement, I would add on an extra inch or 2 of stem length. So remember, you can always go back and cut more. You cannot reattach stem if you've cut too much. So just be conservative as you pick your stem lengths and adjust if need be. So we're gonna take some time to clean up our guard petals. If you wanna get your rose to blow open a little bit faster, you can always blow on the face of it, which will relax your petals, or you can flip it upside down and do a spin like this, and that will also flare out your petals, which is very pretty. So I'm gonna work in my Kahala in a little bit of a grouping. I'm gonna work off of trios, I think. And I'm still cutting on a nice deep angle, just yanking off my guard petals and working in a pretty little pocket. So I've got one trio right here, and I'm just gonna work my way around the base. You can spin as you go, but you wanna make sure that you're looking at this from all different vantages. And when I say that I'm putting in groupings of roses, I always love to do either trios or triangles, or sometimes I'll do duos at a slant. I don't like to do duos side by side because you get like the eyeball effect, which is not super flattering. But when I do groupings, I'm not so literal. I don't make my roses super, super tight so they're touching. They just need to be in the same general vicinity. So I'll do a spin back. So you can see this is a trio, pocket of 3 over here, and they're close to one another, but they're not on top of one another. And as we go, you might bump up against a kale stem or another stem. That's where you want to put your rose. So if you run into a roadblock, just pick a spot in the foam that's nearby. So don't ever try to force it because you may wind up with a broken stem. And I'm just concentrating on trying to get this pretty color worked in on all sides of my design. So I've got some that are more towards the ends, some that are on the sides, just kind of spinning as I go to make sure that I disperse it evenly. So that's what my long and low is looking like. It's starting to fill in nicely. I'm happy with how it's taking shape. So I'm going to next grab for my beautiful garden rose. This is a Queen's Crown garden rose. And you can tell, again, it has a super high petal count. It's a pretty lavender shade. And I'm going to, again, pull off my leaves. I'm gonna yank off my guard petals. And this is a rose. You can tell it's a softer variety. So it performs a little bit differently than Kahala. It blows open beautifully. It gets really nice and big quickly. And it loves the blowing on the face of the rose trick. So it really relaxes a lot better than a Kahala does. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut this at an angle, and I'm gonna start working these in. Now, since I only have a few of these, I'm not gonna attempt to group them. I'm just gonna evenly space them around the design. Okay, so I've got one on the end, one kind of towards the middle, and I'll do one on the other side. Okay, this particular color palette we are showing on our website this year, the spring season. It's called the Peachy Keen, and it has been the runaway hit of our spring season. People are loving it. It's just a pretty combination. Peach and lavender works really well. So our next ingredient is going to be the beautiful Peach Myra Garden Rose. These are really, really roughly, they are like a peachy, melony pink color, and they're a smaller headed garden rose, but they open to be really beautiful and ruffly, so it's a fun add to this design. And we're going to, again, get leaves off, blow them open a little bit, and just tuck them in. And they're a fun pairing next to the Kahala. It's a similar color, but it's just a different shape, so you can see that's one of them. So all of our roses and our hydrangeas so far have come in from South America, and that's a big producer of roses and hydrangea. And our kale are coming from California farms, so many different countries and regions touched in this one arrangement, which is neat. All right, so continuing to spin so everybody can take stock of what's going on. Okay, so next up we're gonna work on our fill ingredients. So I would say that the arrangement can be divided into three stages. So the first stage is going to be greening up and laying a foundation. So your hydrangea went in, your greenery went in, and your kale, and that was stage one. And after stage one, we kind of had a traced out shape. We had an idea of where we were going. Phase two was adding your bulky, weighty flowers like your roses. And then stage three is going to be adding your exciting fill flowers. So the little detail flowers that make this arrangement interesting. Right now it's beautiful and it's starting to fill in, but it's not interesting yet. So we're gonna add the texture, the little pieces that you see when you're up close. So first up is going to be our Blue Moon Spray Rose. This is a beautiful complement to our Queen's Crown Garden Roses. They're almost the same color by design. So we're going to rip off any of the low-lying leaves, and then we're also going to have to do a little bit of work on the guard petals. So spray roses, because there's a million guard petals, I don't always go crazy. I just pull away anything that's really egregious. And oftentimes I'll even wait to remove guard petals until I put the spray rose into the arrangement, because if the bloom is nestled and tucked up against something, you might not even be able to see all the guard petals. So I am not always the most thorough when it comes to my spray roses. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and start popping in my spray roses. Spray roses are awesome anywhere in your arrangement, but they are particularly awesome along the vase line. So see how pretty that is if I tuck it in really low down on the vase line, like almost near where my hydrangea are and underneath the roses. They're a great ingredient to put low down. And it's funny, I also tend to design, when I do bridal bouquets, I tend to do a lot of spray roses lower down in my bouquet as well. They just, they're not the sexiest of flowers, but they're a good workhorse, and I like the way they look lower down in the design. So I'm gonna take my spray rose and I'm gonna work him in, stick one in right here. And I'm gonna do the same kind of all over the arrangement. So wherever you've got a hole, you can work in your spray rose, wherever feels good to you. All of our arrangements at this point are gonna be slightly different, so don't feel like you have to exactly replicate what I'm doing. Wherever you've got a nice void, they're great to use. Okay. All right, so I've got my spray roses all worked in. I'm happy with where they're sitting. Next up, I'm gonna pop in some pink rice flower, which is another flower that I love really for springtime only. I don't use a ton of rice flower any other time of year, but I think the blush color is so beautiful and light, fun texture. So I'm gonna go ahead and pocket this in as well. And I'm gonna put it some towards the top of my design, wherever you've got a nice hole. And you may be picking up on the smell of rice flower. So it's a very herbally type smell. Some people say it smells a little bit like marijuana. So if you get funny looks from your family members, you can blame it on the rice flower. It definitely has a distinct smell to it. So we're gonna spin around and just take stock of where we've got space. So I've got one piece sitting right here, another right here, and I'll pop in the other on the other side. The good news is rice flower has absolutely no smell to it when it's been inserted in the vase. So it's just those couple of seconds when you cut the stem that you get a whiff of it, and then it does not smell anymore. So if you're bothered by it, do not be worried. Next up, we're going to pop in some hypericum. So we're using a really gorgeous pinky hypericum. Hypericum is a berry, or at least it looks like a berry. It's actually technically graded as a flower. It's just cut in the berry stage, which is the workaround for United States Customs. So it's very difficult to import non-domestic berries. Actually, it's not possible to import them. So hypericum is technically graded as a flower, and that's how we get it into the States. On a few occasions, we've had one of these little berries open into a flower, and the flower is totally non-remarkable. You would never buy it in flower form. It's just a tiny white-looking flower. But as a berry, it's cool texture. So we're going to pop this in wherever you've got space. And the good news is we're running quickly out of space. So we're getting really nice and full in our long and lows. And I'm just ripping off any of the low-lying leaves, cutting on an angle, and popping them in. Okay. All right, so that's really fun. I keep spinning so you can see how this is taking shape, just like that. All right, so I've got a couple things left in my bucket. The next thing that I'm going to play with is my Lysianthus. We have beautiful pink Lysianthus. This is actually kind of like an apricot pink. And our Lysianthus stems have buds attached. So these are laterals or arms. We're just gonna separate the arms. If you like the look of the buds, you can certainly use them in your design. I love the look of the buds. I think they're very springy, so I'm gonna use some. I would recommend, if you are using the buds, to keep the stem length a little bit longer so they can kind of wisp out. So I would keep the length to 6 or 7 inches. And while I like the look of Lisianthus buds, I don't want to go crazy with Lisianthus buds, so I'm going to put a couple in, not all of them. And I always get asked if they're going to open. The answer is no. Unfortunately, once the Lisianthus has been cut, it's kind of in a suspended state, so it's not going to open. And then of course you're going to add the Lisianthus bloom. And I like to leave the Lisianthus bloom stems also a little bit on the longer side, just so that they're prominent in the arrangement. So everyone will have a different stem of Lisianthus. You may get 1 bloom, you may get 3 blooms. It really just depends on the stem. So whatever you've got, just pop into your arrangement. It's a pretty pinky color. Okay. And then our last ingredient is my favorite. We've got beautiful salmon ranunculus. So these are really beautiful and layered. We're going to go ahead and work these in. So because these are such a gorgeous focal flower, I would recommend that we leave the stems a little bit on the longer side. So we're going to leave them tall enough so that they can poke out and kind of sit on top of the other flowers. So 6 or so inches is a good length. And we're just going to pop these in all over. Ranunculus are great because they're beautiful out of the gate, but as they open, they'll continue to get bigger and bigger and they'll look like tissue paper. It's a really delicate flower. And they are, even though they look delicate, a pretty long-lasting bloom as well. So that's a perk. And once we've got our flowers in, we're going to add a final fun element to our design. Everyone should have a couple Easter eggs. They're fake, there's nothing in them, little foam eggs. And you should have a hyacinth stake. So I'm going to take my stake and just cut it into a smaller piece, like a 6-inch section. And then I'm going to spear my eggs. I'm just giving my eggs little stems. And I'm just going to pop these little eggs down into my arrangements. So it's just a fun Eastery accent. So I've got one little egg sitting here, and you can pop in your other eggs. So I think especially if you have kids sitting at your table, it is fun to give them the challenge of finding the eggs in the flowers. Just a cutesy little touch. So this is our completed long and low. I'll pick it up so you can see it from the top. It's lush and beautiful and springy and full. So to keep this happy and fresh until the holiday, I would recommend giving it water at least once a day until it overflows the vase. That's the most important. Keeping it away from heat and direct sunlight is really vital, so not near a sunny window or ledge. And then if you have a mister, misting the flowers is always great. And that's really all you need to do to keep these happy and fresh. And I hope that they are the perfect finishing touch to your Easter tablescape, and I wish you all a very, very happy holiday. It was fun designing with you from my kitchen, so thanks for letting me be a part. Have a great night. Bye-bye.